Hey y'all, this is Gabe the Nutritionist, and I want to do today's video on RFK Jr. Now, there is a controversy with RFK Jr. saying something along the lines of, can the keto diet actually cure schizophrenia and bipolar disorder? Now, the thing is, he misspoke, right? In the world, when you say cure, it's like garlic, right, to a vampire. You can't say that. And the reason you can't say that is because there's always in a race controversy. That's because words matter, and when it comes to politics, when it comes to people being very emotional, right? People tend to use their meaning of words as opposed to what a defined word means, right? Which is very important. Because you could say something completely wrong by not knowing the definition, right? And people do it all the time. So, again, right? And this then leads to a big debate, right? That can healthy changes in your diet cure disease? Or is it just another way to treat a disease, right? So, an example would be type 2 diabetes, right? You have people that go on a keto diet, low carb, they're high fat, moderate high protein, depending, right? But the point being, right, is that these people eventually over time, right, can lower their A1C and they get remission from type 2 diabetes and they can live a normal life again, right? Minus having to stay on that diet. But outside of that, right, they have their symptoms, they're gone, the metabolic syndrome, the insulin resistance. They're now living a life where they're free from the disease, right? So is it a cure or is it a treatment? Well, that's where meanings have to be defined. And a pessimist would argue, right, that a person who does this is only healthy because they're on the diet, right? So if they went back to American standard diet, right, of eating sugary junk food, eating seed oils, they would just get type 2 diabetes again, right? And through that argument, right, clearly it's not a cure, right, because you gotta stay on it, which is basically a treatment, right, to be in remission. But again, right, like I always express, it's important to understand words and their meaning, right? Because of politics, because of lawyers arguing, people are so invested into rhetoric that we forget that words have meaning. And the thing is, we don't want to misconstrue words, we don't want to misunderstand people, we want to have full, proper communication and dialogue. So again, right, I don't really care about a person's personal interpretation of words, right? Let's go by some defined meanings to understand what words mean and if he misspoke or if he's right or maybe there's truth to both, right? This is why I'm here. So a cure is something that completely and permanently eliminates a disease, right? And all the underlying causes. So that means once you do it, the disease won't come back. That's what a cure is. So an example would be taking antibiotics, right? Because you get a pathogenic bacteria, causes infection to people, causes a sickness. You take the antibiotics, you kill the bacteria, you're back to normal, right? So that, in that sense, that would be a cure, right? And then you get treatment. Treatment is basically the most common use of that word, right? Which is any intervention you use to manage, reduce, control, or alleviate any symptoms or disease progression, right? So without necessarily limiting the underlying cause, right? The root cause. What this means, right, is, you're going to have pharmaceutical, right, drugs, you're going to have surgery, you're going to have nutrition, behavior supportive therapy, and you can reduce or slow the symptoms of a disease down, right? So you're managing a disease, but you're not eliminating it, right? That's what a treatment would be. So, for example, taking a statin medication to reduce LDL cholesterol, if you see the LMAO right there, I mean, that's because it's complete BS, right? But it's just to make a point. So then you have complete and full remission. So remission is a state in which the signs and symptoms of a disease are undetectable, right? But a disease may process, it could come back, right? That's the thing, right? It's the fear of the unknown, right? You're basically cured, but you're kind of skeptical and you don't want to say, yes, this is an all-out cure, this is the way. And the reason people do that, right, is because, again, right, if you remove the intervention, you remove the treatment, then it comes back, right? That's the fear, right? So understanding that, right, there can never, by definition, be ever a cure for anything, right? I'm sure there's some very specific scenarios where there can be a cure, but in general use of that word, that's why it's very radioactive, right? That's why it causes controversy anytime the word cure is being used. So for example, right, a ketogenic diet that lowers A1C below diabetic levels, no need for medication to get off metformin, get off insulin, you're in complete full remission, right? A lot of people have been able to achieve this. But what about in the terms of autoimmunity, right? Let's say you get a partial remission, right? So partial remission would be a state in which the signs and symptoms of a disease are significantly reduced, right? you're doing way better, you're living a better quality of life, but you still have the disease. It's just not as bad, right? So the example of autoimmunity, right? You get a disease that flares up every now and then, as opposed to it being flared up every single day, right? Like lupus or something, right? So that's really what it is, right? And then we're going back to this, right? Does a keto diet cure schizophrenia and bipolar disorder? Was RFK Jr. wrong? So, can it cure? No. Can it grant remission and can it treat people even better than previous tools? Yes, you definitely can. Was RFK Jr. wrong? I think RFK Jr. knowingly spoke wrongly to have some controversy, right? Because again, right, we're talking about politics. He is the Health and Human Services Secretary, the food pyramid. There's been a lot of controversy with studies and what he wants to focus on. Apparently it's a crime to focus on food and making people healthy, right? Which I don't care, right? You stir up the bee's nest, right? Because it gets dialogue going, it gets people having conversations, and we, as a people, can progress further into understanding potential tools we can use to better human civilization and health, right? Because again, right, you can hate this guy because he's part of this political thing, right? But outside of this, right, you can't really hate this guy because he's shining a light where it belongs, right? Some people know about this for a few years already about using a ketogenic diet to help people improve their mental health. So let's move on, right? So you have a cure, right? And the reason I say cure is a dead word is because it's a very just like buzzword, right? And the reality is a medical establishment doesn't do much curing of anything, right? So again, right, there's a magic pill that can cure and fix and heal you besides antibiotics. I mean, because really their main tools, right, that actually, do some kind of work, right, is going to be pharmaceuticals, surgery, sometimes a nutritional supplement, behavioral support therapy, used for treatments and remissions, right? And, it gets kind of weird here, right? Because some people may consider a vitamin or mineral deficiency to be cured, right, once you get enough of that nutrient, right? Let's say you have beriberi, right? And you take B1 and you're cured of it, right? But if you have poor dietary choices and you're not eating a nutritious diet, standard American diet, right? You're just going to fall back into a, deficiency, right? Causing that problem to happen again. So the question then becomes, right? Is eating quality and nutritious food just treatment or is it proper maintenance, right? At this point, it becomes more of a philosophical question, right? Because people don't want to answer that. If you answer it and say, yes, food does matter, for some reason that's, weird and it's bad. But the reality is what you do eat does influence your body. It does influence your metabolism. It does influence how your body's going to react, right? In the same way, you could give your car no gasoline, it ain't going to run, right? So let's look into Chris Palmer, right, and what he said. Because this is pretty much the guy he's talking about. This is the guy he heard about. He's pretty sure he saw his work, saw some interviews, got really excited, and maybe he misspoke on purpose. Maybe he misspoke on accident because he was excited. I don't know, right? But point being, some light needs to be shed, right? Kind of like the acetaminophen and the autism and the folate, which I did an article on that. Because, yeah, I mean, when you say something, there is some truth to it, right? And he shouldn't outright hate it because of the politics. So Dr. Palmer had an interview with the Crimson from Harvard, right? Because he's a Harvard kind of guy. So he said that he was grateful and honored that Kennedy highlighted his research, but he stressed that the ketogenic diet as a therapy, is not a cure for schizophrenia. Because again, right, what I told you, right, about the word cure, right? It's very radioactive, it's a buzzword, people hate it because they don't do much of any of that kind of stuff, right? So for them, they're probably feeling kind of bad, right? Because there is really no curing. But he did say, right, if he said it was a powerful treatment, it would have been spot on. Because in reality, it is a powerful treatment in which people can, improve their lives to live a normal life in some cases, and people have been able to hit remission, right, while staying on that diet, right, and those interventions. And this is where, he kind of sheds light on what cure is, right? When people say cure, they think it's something permanent, right, and it can't happen again. But the reality is, right, if you do a ketogenic diet and you stop the treatment, there's going to be a relapse. And basically, in the people they see in the studies, right, once they stop the ketogenic diet, the mental illness gets worse, right? Whereas it improved if they stayed on it, right? So under that logic, it can't be a cure. So a cure would be you do a ketogenic diet for a little bit, you stop, and then the illness never comes back. But in Dr. Palmer's experience, right, because this is what he does, right, what he's seen is people that stop the diet, right, they get back their mental illness, right? The symptoms come back even more severe, right, if it's severe. So you have to stay on it. So in essence, if you do ketogenic diet for mental health, you got to stay on it to get the benefits of it. That's what it is, right? So who is Dr. Palmer, right? Like, who is this guy, right? I think it's a big deal, and people should know this guy because he is the founder and director of the Metabolic and Mental Health Program and the director of the Department of Postgraduate and Continuing Education for McLean Hospital and assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, right? So just for the record, right, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, right? Or a psychologist is like a PhD kind of person, right? People often construe that. So for 30 years, he's held administrative, educational, research, and clinical roles in psychiatry, right? He's really famous for the book Brain Energy. If you're into this kind of stuff, I'm sure you've heard of him already. But basically, he presents a theory in which he believes may cause mental illness, right? And, based on his research, he claims the mental disorders are rather a metabolic disorder of the brain, right? So it integrates biological, psychological, and social factors so people understand the connections between mental and physical health, right? Because the reality is, we gotta look for more solutions, right? You can't just give a pill for everything, right? Because there's side effects, and the side effects are terrible, and people aren't better, right? Like they're just barely getting by, right? They're doing enough to live decently, right? But, you could always do better, right? That's kind of the point of research and why the diet angle is so important, right? Because doing all this therapy and doing all this, medication can only take you so far, right? But can we take it even farther, right? Can we add a new tool to the arsenal? So why is Dr. Palmer unique, right? Like I said, right, besides these surgical treatments used in psychiatry, he believes dietary intervention, like a variation of the keto diet, can actually help people improve their mental health, illness, symptoms, maybe even further, right? And again, right, he's a medical professional. He works at an ancient, prestigious institution like Harvard. I don't care what a person's credential is, right? But he does good work, and when the work shows, he is someone people should be impressed with. And he is clear from his opinion, right, that keto diet isn't for everybody, right? Because he only studies it for mental illness. So he says people with the following should be medically supervised. People with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, anxiety, ADHD or ADD, depending on your preference, certain autism spectrum disorders, and people on psychiatric medicine. And the thing is, keto is a tool, right? And it should be used responsibly, and it shouldn't be a replacement for all therapies, right? And what he does stress, right, is people should not be jumping up medication, right? Like if you are any one of these people, right, that need these help, and you feel the need to, jump off your medications, don't do that, right? Instead, you should incorporate a ketogenic diet, right? Find someone who's a professional that understands this kind of stuff. They could tailor your medication so you do the right stuff. So as you get better, they could, tweak it the right way, right? Because if you jump off medication, it's not it's not good for anybody, right? Because people can get crazy, right? And the whole point of, the medication is to help medicate you to the point where you're, going to be able to live in society and work with society, right? And the whole point of the whole dietary intervention angle, right, is people could possibly, live an even more normal life and use less medication, right? But again, that's what you got to talk to with your mental health professionals to do, right? So the theory in a nutshell, right, is mental illness in his theory, right, is a disorder of brain energy metabolism, right? And he's a big believer in the keto diet for doing this because, again, right, you have glucose, you got ketones, right? They can both go to the brain to power your brain and give it energy, right? Because the brain is very demanding with its energy needs. So for people, for whatever reason, they may have a glucose metabolism issue. Maybe they're inefficient with their GLUT4 transport, right? For some reason, people cannot get enough glucose to their brain, right? So instead, right, you could do ketones. Ketones are very cleaner, it's a very efficient fuel, and it bypasses the blood-brain barrier, right? So if you, for whatever reason, right, and I think they've seen this in people with epilepsy, people that have issues with dementia, Alzheimer's, is by people going on a keto diet, they're able to make these ketone fuels, right, to bypass the blood-brain barrier and to go straight into the brain and give it the brain energy it needs, right? And by doing so, you can have mitochondrial biogenesis, which means you could create more mitochondria ATP, right, which is the energy. By doing a keto diet, you can reduce oxidative stress, which means less inflammation. Very good. You can stabilize neuronal firing, so your neurons are balanced and they're not out of whack, right? And also improving insulin sensitivity in the brain. So this ties together mental illness and blood sugar disorders like diabetes, obesity, epilepsy, and neurodegeneration. And the thing is, they're not all separate diseases, right? Because they're all blood sugar related disorders, right? But they all overlap on top of each other, right? And they cause these issues. So it may be stand to reason, right, that people with terrible dietary habits, right, may have a reason as to why they should go on a keto diet, right? By changing their diet to doing something more cleaner, healthier, and by going through the ketosis, right? That's why it's called keto, right? That by going through ketosis, they could then give their body and brain this alternative energy they need to function even better, right? It's basically the theory in a nutshell without getting too complicated. This is his book where he explains all this kind of stuff for using it for mental health. And I think if a person is really interested in psychology and they're mental health people and they want to understand different dimensions to further improve upon their patients, they should read this book, right? Because the diet angle is missing from every disease, right? Sure, you could give every person ever a drug for every disease, but if you're not working on the health and wellness part, right? You're not working on a good diet to fix those corners that are being cut. If you're not working on the energy part of it, right? Where you work out, you exercise, the wellness part, right? Then you're not giving your body the fuel it needs to healing it better, right? Whether it's your brain, whether it's another physical ailment, it depends, right? You can never neglect diet, right? As a nutritional therapy practitioner, we understand people don't eat well. They eat a bunch of crap, they eat a bunch of garbage. And we're here to fix that, right? So people can take a diet that's nutritious with their vitamins, with their minerals, and to get the energy they need to live a happier and healthier life. So the thing is, what kind of keto diet, right? Because as a nutritionist, I've seen a ton of people do the keto diet, and some people do it very wrong. It's way too high carb, not even a keto diet. Some people do just high protein. Some people do modified sparing fast. There's different ways to do a keto diet, right? But to keep it simple, when it comes to mental health and that kind of ilk, right, is the fact that people need to focus on a classical ketogenic diet, right, which is going to be a very, very high-fat ketogenic diet, right, where people are going to focus on those ketones and the brain energy so they could, do better with their mental health disorders. And, like I said, right, some people do a high-protein version of keto, some people do a high-fat, which is the right version for this. Some people do it all plant-based, some people do all animal-based, some focus on macros while doing, like the keto chunk food and snacks with seed oils. Not good. So yeah, you want to do a classical high-fat ketogenic diet because that's the main goal of the diet, to switch from sugary carbohydrate glucose to using fuel of healthy fats known as ketones, right? Fatty ketones will then fuel the brain even better and more efficient than sugar ever could. And carbohydrates should be kept as low as possible, and then carbs should not go over 20 or 30 grams of carbohydrates, right? And just to have people understand what a net carb is, it's usually when you subtract the fiber and in some instances sugar alcohols, right, from the total amount of the carbs, right? So here you have 8 grams of fiber, right? You see the fiber, you see sugar alcohol, so 6 plus 7, 6, 7, right? So then you get 8 minus 7, and you're left with 1 gram of carbs, right? From this example of the nutrition facts. So that means for that consumption, for that one piece, that person got 1 gram of total net carbs. So when you're doing this, it's important to always count your carbs, right? If you're doing this for mental health, right? To stay in ketosis. Because the whole point is to keep you steady, keep you, treated, so your mental illness doesn't, trigger and get worse, right? Become more severe. So you have clean, high fat, moderate protein, and very low carb keto diet, right? So when it comes to fat, right, because fat is going to be your fuel, right? Do not use seed oils, do not use ultra processed keto snacks and foods. Early on, people shouldn't use artificial sweeteners because everybody responds differently to them, right? So it's just so you get a nice, good start to understand yourself so you have no issues. And then for your fat sources, people should use animal fats like tallow, butter, and ghee, extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, MCT. The thing about MCT oil, right, is what's really interesting is it converts to ketones pretty quick, right? So for some people, they keep MCT oil on them, where they need to have that quick hit of ketones, and they're able to feel mentally better. Fatty fish helps with the DHA and to rebuild the mitochondrial membranes. Now, people should eat at least around 160 grams of healthy fats daily, right, for your meals, like in total. That way, you're giving your body the energy it needs to run and to function and to have that fuel, right, to live, right? So, this is more or less what a diet pyramid would look like, right? No fruits, no potatoes, no beer, no rice, no bread, no sugar. You keep your fats going good, you keep your proteins going good, and for a little bit of carbs, it's going to be usually some kind of, you know, vegetables, right? Because vegetables tend to be low carb, right? And as always, people do organic if you can, so you remove as much glyphosate as you can from your diet. So the diet should have moderate protein, anything too high, right? And this is because the body can go through a process known as gluconeogenesis if you eat way too much protein. There's still arguments about whether it's demand driven or if it's body driven. So, I mean, there's arguments everywhere when it comes to this. But just to be safe, right? Just to assume, right? Like, it goes that way. The body can convert some of these proteins, amino acids, into glucose, right? And what shocks me is the amount of people that don't even know this, right? People think if you don't get any carbs, right, that you will die. But if you eat enough proteins, right, your body will make, what it needs, and it'll make its glucose for the blood, right? Because you do need some glucose in the body, right, so it can run, especially to balance your blood sugar. But of course, we don't want too much because then it gets all crazy, right? So just for this, very specific caveat, right, for people to not, leave their ketones, right? As too much protein may kick people out of ketosis, and there's going to be too much glucose in the blood, which can blunt the therapeutic effects of the brain, right? We don't want to switch from using ketones to using inferior glucose sources energy, right? And the thing is, a lot of people do better on keto, right? Especially when it comes to mental health. I'm sure once there's enough funding and people do stuff, we'll find out people are deficient in B vitamins, they're deficient in important minerals like zinc, right? But for the time being, we're going to focus on keto and hopefully get enough traction so, hopefully the government can fund studies to, research this even better. So when people eat protein, when it comes to this, they should eat at least 70 grams of protein daily, right? So they can maintain their lean muscle mass, right? And again, right, like you're not a bodybuilder, right? This isn't a bodybuilding diet. It's a higher fat keto diet for people suffering from mental health disorders, right? So they can improve their symptoms and kind of live a better life, right? And reduce medications. And that's the whole point of why people do what they do, right? So people can have a better quality of life, right? To do the best with what they have. Because we're all given different cards in life, right? And some people have good cards, some people have bad cards, right? It's a mix, right? So unfortunately, some people, they have mental illness, and keto is able to help people, live a remotely normal life. Which, thank God, right? It's good to know that. So this means people should be switching from eating meats like sirloin and low-fat, 937 ground beef, to a higher fat option like an 80/20 ground beef, like more ribeye steaks, like brisket. But again, right, you can still enjoy leaner cuts of meat like sirloin, but make sure you eat enough fat with your meals, right? Add more butter, add more olive oil, add more tallow. That way, you're giving your body the energy it needs to function. And this is the pathway of gluconeogenesis. So this all goes down through here, all these conversions to make glucose 6 phosphase. And the thing is, you use like alanine, amino acids, and the conversion going on, and people can make this, right? And, like I said, right, I'm surprised there's doctors and there's dietitians and all these fancy people that have done this for years that don't even know that this mechanism exists in the body, right? People say, oh, that carnivores are going to die, right? But there's no dead carnivore yet, right? Like, because the body can do this. So can I carb cycle off the keto diet and have cheat days? Now that's the thing, right? It's not encouraged. Especially, if you don't have like mental health orders, right? And you're normal and you're doing keto just for health, right? You can afford to do that, right? Because you don't have these issues that they have, right? But if you're doing this diet for mental health and you want to improve your symptoms, right? Whether it's ADHD, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's bipolarism, whatever you may have, right? The whole point is you can't really do any cheating, right? Because if you cheat, you'll go back to your symptoms. And for a lot of people, they end up doing a ketogenic diet and they've improved in their symptoms. They don't actually want to cheat. because they're living such a better life than they were previously, right? So for that idea, right, of it being a cure, right, it's not a cure because you have to stay on this to be in remission. When you get off, it comes back. So does keto actually work for mental health? And I'm going to say yes. There is a mental health counselor by the name of Nicole Laurent, and she's had a lot of success with putting patients on a ketogenic metabolic therapy diet. And she's had a few case studies actually where she had a 26-year-old man with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, right, hit remission. She had a woman, 47 years old, right, with mixture depressive disorder, hit remission. She's had a 17-year-old woman with schizophrenia, right, talking about suicidal thoughts, auditory, visual hallucinations, and depression disorder, hit remission, right? Which is like amazing, right? That's pretty cool, right? 32-year-old woman with schizophrenia, suicidal thoughts and attempts. She had paranoia, audio and visual hallucinations, and she hit remission by doing this ketogenic metabolic therapy, right? Which is pretty awesome. It's amazing. So if you're interested in this woman, right, look her up, Nicole Laurent. That's her. I know she's in quite a lot of podcasts and interviews. So yeah, if you're a person that suffers from mental illness, you have a loved one, family member, or friend, right? Look this woman up and show people that there is a way forward, and science every day gets better and better and better, right? And for people that are very skeptical, right, saying, "Oh, it's just an N of one," right? It worked for one person, right? Well, the fact is, it worked for one person, right? As opposed to it not working at all, right? So with more research, more funding, we can find better quality studies that are fancy for the people with stuck-up noses, so people can finally understand, like, yeah, like this is something, right? Like there is more than just drugs and therapy, right? You can have I don't know, a trinity, right? These three things all together can actually help someone, right, live a normal life again. So again, people shouldn't sleep on this. So here's an example, right? For the person with major depressive disorder, they had this diet. She was unmedicated. She was 150 pounds, BMI 25.7, stabled. And what's interesting, right, is this isn't just a ketogenic diet alone, right? She was a B complex that was methylated with trace minerals like zinc, copper, manganese, chromium, molybdenum, boron, and vanadilyl sulfate, vitamins D, vitamin K, electrolytes like sodium, magnesium, calcium, and potassium. Also took fish oil, 2 grams, providing 650 milligrams of EPA and 450 DHA. This woman continued an iron supplement provided by her doctor, which I assume she was anemic. They tracked her using a chronometer. So what's interesting is this woman, right? Her carbohydrate consumption was 67 grams on average, right? And they modified her diet, so it became 163 grams of fat, 79 grams of protein, and 30 grams of net carbs, right? So what I find interesting, right, is this woman was already low carb, but she wasn't keto, right? So this goes to show just in this woman's, case scenario, right, that just because she was doing a low carb, which is good, right, a lot of people do low carb, and I think it's great, right, is that it really wasn't enough for her to move the needle. She had to go into ketosis, right? Because to go into ketosis means you get the ketones, right? And you can run even better, right? So her modified ketogenic diet ratio was 163 grams of fat, 79 grams of protein, and 30 grams net carbs, right? And the reason they increased her carbohydrate is because she was more of a plant-based kind of person. So over time, they were able to reduce her carbs, right? She had a diet that had fish, shellfish, eggs, dairy, processed plant protein, vegan steak, plant chicken, right? Fats included avocados, olive oil, MCT oil, heavy cream, nuts and nut butters, like macadamia nuts and peanut butter, and with some low carbohydrate veggies and small amounts of berries, right? And the woman ate twice a day. So what's awesome is, oh, and another thing, right, is they gave her acetyl L-carnitine, right, which is about 2 grams per day into 2 doses divided. So 1 gram with one meal, 1 gram with the other meal. And this woman, right, even though she wasn't, doing a lot of meat, she was able to, do better and recover, right? Not completely, right, because you got to stay on the diet to get the, positive therapeutic effects of a ketogenic diet, right? But for this woman, it worked. And let's look at the woman with a schizoaffective disorder, right? She took a multivitamin with methylated B vitamins, trace minerals like iodine, zinc, selenium, manganese, chromium, molybdenum, boron, vitamin D, K2, and A, electrolytes with sodium, magnesium bisglycinate, potassium citrate, acetyl L-carnitine, which was prescribed at 1 gram in divided daily doses, right? This woman, before, right, was interestingly enough, like fairly low carb, right? Like higher intake of low carb, right? 130 to 180 grams of carbs a day before she started. Again, right? Ate pizza, pasta, quesadillas, rice bowls, nuts, crackers, cheese, and chocolate. Coffee, no big deal, right? A woman occasionally drank alcohol. And over, 2 weeks, right, they gradually reduced her carbs into 20 grams per day, right? And, that's pretty awesome, right? That people are able to do this. So later the ratio was adjusted, right, to 190 grams of fat, 75 grams of protein, and 20 grams of net carbs, right? With ad libitum feeding, which means that person ate, as much as they could, right? While they kept the carbs low, right? To support athletic activities and maintain normal BMI. This person's diet was beef, chicken, eggs, and dairy, with fat sources like avocado oil-based mayo, olive oil, macadamia nuts, MCT oil, and butter. Also with low carbohydrate veggies, were regularly consumed along with keto treats sweetened with stevia, erythritol, and monk fruit. So yeah, here it is, another person, right, that was able to, hit remission by staying on a ketogenic diet, that was able to best support mental health, right? And this is the person with schizophrenia, right? This is the person that would see things that weren't there, that would hear things that weren't there. I don't recall if this was the person that tried to commit suicide, but the point being, right, is this is going to give hope to people, right, that, that see things that aren't there, right? People that may think about depression or, suicidal thoughts, right? That there is a way forward, right? And it's not just putting people on Lexapro, right? It's not just putting people on different drugs where they feel like zombies, right? We do know the serotonin theory is bullshit, right? Because they looked at different levels about people throughout the years, whether it was low, medium, or high. It made no difference whether a person had, depression or not, right? So again, we got to rethink everything, right? We got to go through the nutrition angle, right? Because if you're eating, McDonald's every day, you're eating Burger King every day, you're eating a bunch of junk food every day, a bunch of candy and chips and ice cream, and you know, you're really gonna think, you're healthy? No, like health it's an all around kind of thing, and the reality is, we gotta, take serious, the food angle, and whether you love or hate RFK Jr., I mean, this is something serious that should be taken about, right? Removing terrible ingredients from our food, making it cleaner, making it healthier, because well, why don't we deserve it, right? Like I'm jealous of the Italians, right? Italians have awesome clean food, very strict laws with their food, and I'm like, why don't we have that, right? Well, because he who should not be named, right? These big corporations. So what's it mean for the future, right? That there are successful case studies of people that have been able to go into remission, live a better quality of life. What this means is doctors, medical professionals, mental health professionals, nutritionists, and researchers should not be ignorant. Don't be ignorant, right? Because eating food for quality nutrition is essential for mental health. People with mental illness have been able to live a better quality of life with a ketogenic diet than previous attempts to treat them with drugs and therapy alone, right? Now, if you don't like the ketogenic diet and you want to throw away the baby with the bathwater, then again, right, like that's a disservice to people that need help, right? Because people have been using ketogenic diet before modern drugs, right? Before the schizophrenic drugs, right? Before the what do you call it? Before the diabetes, there's even people like 1860s going on a sort of keto kind of diet to help them with that. Again, epilepsy, right? Very famous, 1920s. They got real popular. So historically, I mean, there's been some case scenarios of people using a keto diet like hundreds of years ago, maybe even 150, right? And maybe even before then, right? But we do the best we can with history going back. But again, right, with the resurgence of a ketogenic diet, right, known for treating people with epilepsy, you can use it to help people with type 2 diabetes go into remission. And now with RFK Jr. in this sort of controversy, right, with what he said in Tennessee, is that people are now going to understand that you can use a mental health ketogenic diet to live a better life. and give attention to the people that deserve it, right? And to there's a thing, right? Don't disregard this, right? Just because you don't like RFK Jr., just because you don't like Trump, just because you don't like you know just because politics, right? Like I don't really care about politics, right? Like who gives a shit anymore? Well, minus the whole thing with the little island. But point being, right? There's a lot of things going on, and just what RFK Jr. said, right? It's a disservice, right, to people that don't like the guy and are like, you know what, whatever he said is garbage, and we're just gonna ignore it. This guy's a quack. If you do that, there's people out there that do need help. They do need funding. This is a serious topic, mental health. And if you just deny that flat out, right, just because you don't like this guy, then like you're the problem with the world, right? So again, right, funding is unremarkable when it comes to this, right? Because again, you can't patent foods, you can't patent vitamins and minerals. Compared to the pharmaceutical drug trials, they could send him like billions of dollars, and that's why there's funding, right? Because he could patent a drug, right, and then milk it for however long, right, and get rich. So again, when it comes to this topic, right, people should be apolitical because it benefits all of society, right? Not just here, but it could go around the world and help people around the world too, right? Because again, right, if we don't do the best for ourselves and spread that knowledge and use it to help people, then we'll get RB, right? Regardless, I'm proud of RFK Jr. and his position to shed light into various areas of health that have been quite prominent. And it is real exposure, right, for people to understand that there is a way forward and there is hope, and people need to find someone who can help them, best utilize that with their mental health illness and other diseases. So, with more research, we can learn if a dietary approach is the best tool for mental health, or pharmaceuticals fail, or we can figure out if it's mainly a deficiency of B vitamins and minerals, right? But also, there is an angle where some of this can be potential genetic mutations, right? So maybe dietary nutritional tweaks can explain the impact of changing epigenetic expression in genes, right? There's this idea called epigenetics, right? Where a person could be born with a specific gene, right? And you could live a horrible lifestyle and that would just turn on that gene, right? Or you could live a healthier quality life, right? Do the best, exercise, get sun, all that kind of stuff. And you could turn off genes that are bad, right? And your body will change. That's kind of the idea between that, right? So maybe there could be a lot of epigenetic expressions going on that we need more research on, right? To figure things out so we could solve this issue, right? And then maybe one day, once we understand mechanisms better and how, like, the food and drugs work, right? Maybe they can make a super drug one day. I mean, I doubt it, right? Because, I mean, you can't cheat God, you can't cheat biology, right? That's just reality. People need to eat healthier, right? And if it helps people have remission, then hey, so be it, right? Like, it's wonderful that people have figured this out, right? And a lot of people don't even know about it, right? And everyone needs to know about this because everybody knows someone that has some kind of mental disorder. Everybody knows someone that they want them to be happy, right? And there is a way forward and there's a way to do that. But if we, neglect this topic and we act like, we're stupid or there's nothing we can do about it, and the doctors that are skeptical about this even working don't care about this, then we're going nowhere, right? We're just shooting ourselves in the foot and the head, right? And that's not a good thing. So, conclusion, was RFK Jr. wrong in his choice of words? So, he was wrong in his choice of words, right? Because the ketogenic diet does not exactly cure schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. But realistically, right, it has been shown that people who have used ketogenic diets for mental disorders have been able to reduce their symptoms and in some cases even go into remission, right? Which is pretty awesome, right? It's an amazing game changer to even know that alone, right? That being said, right, people should look into Dr. Christopher Palmer and his book Brain Energy to better understand the purpose of using ketogenic diet for mental health in regards to the theory of brain energy metabolism. And hopefully this catches on, right? To not just, a few doctors, but, to the entirety of mental health world, right? To the entirety of all the doctors, right? And again, right, if you're interested and you're curious about Dr. Chris Palmer, he's got interviews on YouTube. Go look him up, and I'm sure you'll learn even more about it, right? Then you have a woman like Nicole Laurent, right, who's doing amazing work by using ketogenic metabolic therapy to help improve the mental disorders of her patients so they can live a better life. Because, it is possible, and you can do it, and she has been helping people do so. So, again, right, you can find some of her interviews on YouTube and see what she's done, right? Another person I've seen, right, is Harmony Bright. It's this woman on Twitter, right? I don't see X because X just sounds weird, right? So she's on Twitter, right? And she's happily flourishing and improving daily from her schizophrenia, right? She was big, she was overweight, she has schizophrenia, a lot of health problems, right? She's been a ketogenic diet for quite a while, and she's doing amazing, right? And it's awesome that she's been ruled by a life of disease to ruling her life free from disease, right? And she's doing her best, right? I mean, because again, right, it's all remission, and you gotta stay on the diet, right? But these people have been so transformed, right? Like they're not gonna cheat on their diet, they're not gonna leave it because they're in a new space where they could be normal, right? And that's amazing. That's beautiful, right? Because at the end of the day, right, if you're suffering from a mental health disorder, you just want to be normal, right? So you can live your life and not be affected in that way, right? Because when you do talk to people that have these problems, right, their life is drastically affected. They can't be normal, and it sucks. And I wish these people the best, right? Because, again, right, like we're born and we're dealt with cards that we don't want, right? But, you just got to deal with it. But if we have a tool to, lessen the burden of mental illness on people, then that's awesome. We got to focus on that. So again, right, if you're a person suffering from mental health disorders and believe you may benefit from a ketogenic diet, then talk to your doctor or a mental health professional to look into a ketogenic metabolic therapy. And if you have a person that's skeptical, point them in the direction of Dr. Christopher Palmer and Nicola Rant, right? Because it is possible and they are doing it. So it's not BS, right? Like this is something that actually happens, right? That they could work with. But every now and then you run into people that are not even skeptical. They hide behind the skeptical veneer and they're just straight up contrarians. No matter what, they're like against it. At that point, find a new doctor, find a new mental health professional, right? Because they're not skeptical, they're just contrarians and they don't add anything of value to the world, right? So again, you could go find a knowledgeable professional near you that practices therapeutic ketogenic diets, right? Because, what should you be kept from that, right? The worst thing that can happen, right, is if you try it and it doesn't work, right? The best thing you can do is if you try it and it does work, right? Because again, right, that's that saying, right? Like, if you're in this position, right, like you got nothing to lose and you have everything to gain. So why not try it, right? So again, thank you, right? I'm making this video free and open for everybody. I'm gonna make it public because I think it's important, right? We got a bunch of crazy people in the world, right? We got a bunch of sad people in this world. We got a bunch of people not so happy in this world, right? And I want to open this video to give people hope, right? So they could do something with their lives, right? To make it better. Because we could sit in silent and suffer, right? But you don't have to, right? There's ways to improve your life. And I hope someone watches this video, they get hit the right way, they're transcended, and they're inspired to want to help not just themselves, but even other people, right? Which is, beautiful and amazing. And I hope, God willing, right, people will do that. And they can care about other people than besides themselves. So again, right, I'm here to get people better, right? Here to point you in the right direction so you could, you know, shed more light on these researchers and give people that need help some actual help, right? Because this is important work to do, right? And it takes a village, right? Because if no one talks about it, no one's going to know about it, right? So I'm doing my due diligence to help spread the word about how a ketogenic diet can be used, right? And again, share this with your friends and family, right? Because I don't want to see a bunch of people tarnishing the keto diet just because of political dogma, right? Because again, right, we're here to point people in the right direction and not do this kind of dog and pony show, right, with the politics. So please support my goal of helping, Americans that are hard workers take back their health by sharing this article on Facebook, Twitter, your group messages, your favorite social media, whatever it is, right? Because I guarantee you, because this video to someone that needs help, and they're going to take a lot away from it, right? And it's going to help them transform their lives, right? But again, right, my name is Gabriel Roy Espronceta. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, and I help people with a lot of things, right? If you don't want a consultation, like I could do this program I did, because I did a lot of free videos on TikTok, and they banned me, and I had to like work hard to get unbanned. And every time I made a video, they made it hard for me. So I made a Patreon, right? And this Patreon is where you could go see all my work uncensored, and I want to be able to say things without, you know, losing my freedom of speech in video, right? Because people deserve to have access to, knowledge. And if we're making knowledge forbidden, right, then what's going on with these platforms, right? Something rather nefarious, I believe, right? But point being, right, if you have a person that has type 2 diabetes, I got a course for them. You want more testosterone as a man? Got a video for you. You want to sleep better, wake up better? I got a video for you. If you want to understand how to use Tylenol responsibly and the importance of folate for your body, click here. What do you do about breast cancer? Best salt to do. how to fix your digestion, how to figure out what foods and supplements are causing negative health triggers. And not just that, but, a lot of things, right? The new Doritos suck, right? Don't eat them, right? They're not that better. Uh, why does your body want to cheat? Because you have a nutrient deficiency, right? And your body wants that, right? Glycine helps you with everything in the body, right? It's pretty amazing. Acne, why people get it, what to do about it. Great article I wrote. People love that one. Planning and creating healthy habits that will stick with you. That was more meant for a New Year's resolution, right? But people, even without the resolution, are able to do this to create habits that are transforming their life, right? Because again, right, it's all about planning, and people aren't really taught about planning and how to make something become real, right? Another thing I've helped people with is B6 toxicity from Paradoxal. Some people take high dose B vitamins and they skew their mineral balance. I help people with that too. Again, mental health, right? I wrote this article about how to validate your purpose in life. There's different archetypes people are, and depending on your archetype, you figure out more or less what helps you validate yourself, right? What makes you happy, right? In a sense, right? Read an article about how bread and beans are stealing nutrients from the foods you eat. Again, phytates. You got to plan how to eat these correctly so you don't lose your nutrients, right? Then you have high dose calcium, vitamin D3. It can actually clog your heart in some cases, hurt your joints, and make your bones even weaker. And how to fix it, right? And the fix was vitamin K2, and I think she was just the right one. But again, right, if you want to be my client, you think I'm helpful, you like me, I've had a lot of people that help you. And, the reality is, I kind of do everything, so type 2 diabetes and obesity, chronic fatigue, stress and sleep, toxic heavy metals, hormone balancing, accutane detox. I'm real big into that one because I have personal experience with that one. Acid reflux and gastritis nutrition, leaky guts, good in acne, heart health, fertility, oncology, cancer, mental health. Because I take this serious, right? I've been doing this for many years already. I've been able to help a lot of people, and I'm really thinking about, doing my videos again, right? I used to do a bunch of short form videos on TikTok before they tried to ban me, and then I just keep it there, right? Because I don't want to lose anything, right? If they ban my account, I lose every video, so I'm not really touching that, right? Because there's people on TikTok that still like it, they use it, and ever since new management, which is very questionable, right? It went from a certain Chinese company to one in the Middle East, can't say that name, right? But, I'm trying to go to Rumble, right, and make videos there, because Rumble, it seems to be a free speech kind of thing, and I hope it is a free speech kind of thing, right, because I want to make videos where I can say things, and not, be in fear of losing my video and people not be able to watch it, right? Because how am I supposed to help people spread the message if they're not going to see it, right? So again, please share this open article with people, right? So people can actually, learn about this, that there is something that can be done about mental health illness, that you're not doomed and stuck, you're not suffering in silence. There is a way forward and tools to use, right? And that's going to be the ketogenic diet. Although it doesn't cure it, it can help you, hit at least full or partial remission depending on your condition, right? And again, right, if you're on medications, don't quit them. Again, right, you want to find a good doctor that does this kind of work, and good mental health counselors and people, so they can help manage you in a way where you won't get out of whack and you're going to be pretty well balanced and do better, right? Because again, right, that's what your health professionals are there for, right? To do the best that they can, right? And you want the best that understand, like, this stuff can help you, right? As opposed to the people that are ignorant, right? That are there, they're jaded, and they don't even know why they're there anymore, right? Or, if you have other health issues, right, here I can help you with, yeah, then, you could click on that link. You could hire me on retainer, right? So my new thing, right, is because the economy sucks. I want to help as many people as possible, right? Is you can hire me on retainer every month. You can have as many appointments with me as you want, phone calls with me, and I'll help you, right? Because again, right, uh, people can't afford to pay per appointment, right? So I prefer people do retainer things. So even if they miss an appointment, right, they're not losing money, and I still have my free time, right? So again, right, guys, thank you. Please share this video. It's very important. People understand that you can do something about this, right? And God bless RFK Jr. for making this a little controversial, right? So now people have to talk about Dr. Christopher Palmer, right? And I'm bringing in Nicole Laurent, right? Because she's actually doing the work too, right? And I think they're probably one of the most cited people when it comes to that kind of work, right? When it comes to doing these research and all the studies on these, you know, my dream is for them to make like a really big study, take all these people and to help them hit that remission, right, for the mental health illness across all domains of mental illness, right? Because again, right, I know people that got a degree in psychology and became, mental health people, and they're stuck because again, right, there's the whole nutrition angle, right, that people are often neglecting, right? So again, thank y'all. God bless y'all. Have an amazing day, and yeah, goodbye. Subscribe, whatever, right?